Hi, thank you for joining us on News and Views again. My name is Renee Ing, and with me today I have Hector Valenzuela again. Thank you so much for being willing to come in on a Sunday to do a show about GMOs. I kind of wanted to do this show for a while, and it nowadays it seems like it's all over the place. You have these non-GMO project labels on the food that we have access to that has no GMOs, and of course everybody has organic and that sort of thing. But so I asked Hector if he could give us a rundown on GMOs. And so Hector, could you before we start, could you give the audience a little introduction to yourself, and then we go into the topic?
Sure. Thanks a lot, Renee, for inviting me again. And yeah, I would like to give a little background about myself and how and then some of the basic issues surrounding the debate about GMOs. As the first slide shows, there's a lot of debate in the state about what to do, how to become more self-sufficient, and what to do with all the agricultural lands in the state. Showing the article today's Star Bulletin. So there's a lot of debate about farming our land, how to do it, and how can we grow more for food. In the next slide, I discuss a little bit about my program in general. And originally, I did a lot of work with variety trials to select adapted varieties for Hawaii to recommend to farmers. Another angle of my work was to look at the big picture in terms of developing sustainable systems for Hawaii. So I looked at the farm level, at the ahupua level, and at the state level to find out what is the most sustainable system for a place like Hawaii. So GMOs kind of fell under my lap because GMOs are new varieties. And when there was a big push in the 90s for GMOs, it kind of fell into my interest of, are these the proper varieties for Hawaii?
Right.
And because they were so different, my question was, are they beneficial for us, or do they have some negatives in terms of the industry? So there's the next following slide shows that there's a general controversy or debate about agriculture. We have to deal with climate change, with environmental decline. There's more rural poverty in rural economic area. In rural areas, there's more poverty, and there's a lot of demand for local and food and organics. So this all falls into the general picture. So then we have GMOs, which was pushed very strongly in the 1990s, and there's a debate whether it's a technology that's out of control. Today on the mainland, we have about 60 million acres that are invaded by what so-called superweeds that cannot be controlled with herbicides. This year, there were over 3 million acres that were damaged by herbicides used for growing GM crops. So there's that level of debate about the industry. So getting back to the basics in terms of GMOs, we're talking about a process that does not follow the laws of nature in terms of reproduction.
Does not follow the laws of nature.
So normally we have a tomato that crosses with a tomato, corn with corn, a horse with a horse. So that follows the laws of nature. But with GMOs, they figured a way to mix genetic material from one species and introduce it to different species.
A horse, genes in a tomato.
So we can cross all kinds of species barriers today, and it is done through a genetic construct or a plasmid. And the goal is to introduce a specific trait into the plant. And here we see a specific trait that wants to be introduced, a desired gene, but then you have to add other material from other different species. So this can have genetic material from bacteria, from viruses and from that desired trait, which can be an animal or a microorganism, and we would like to introduce it, say, from a spider into a corn plant, because we want to promote that desirable trait. The trait can be a new medicine, a pharmaceutical, or it can give the plant resistant to the application of chemicals. So again, this is not something that occurs in nature, and so this is why some people have questions about what are the potential side effects. These other slides are a little more realistic, so you can see that it is a quite complex system where we insert into the plant genetic material from different species in a quite complex setup with different types of. This is a real simplified diagram, and on the upper level you can see this is what we want to introduce to the new plant. So we have the desired trait, which can be resistant to a chemical, but you need additional genetic material so that the host is able to accept that foreign material. So we include a promoter, and a promoter is like a switch that turns genes on and off, and then we have a marker, and the marker allows us to identify whether the trait was introduced into the host, which is in the lower section of the picture, adequately, where there was a proper introduction, as you see on the bottom. So this is kind of like the ideal situation, where it's introduced into the cell, and the cell responds properly. So now you have a corn plant that has a new trait from another species that behaves in a certain way. Now you can produce a medicine or some specific trait that you introduce into the plant. The next slide shows a little more realistic setup, which is once we introduce the trait, the genes here, this is a more realistic perspective, where the genes can start jumping around within the host genome. It can make multiple copies of itself, and it can start to jump around in unpredictable ways. So this is where the scary part comes about, because we really don't understand the genetics. How do the genes interact with one another? Is it going to interact with a third gene and start to produce some metabolite that is allergic or toxic for consumption? So there's a lot of side effects that could occur because we don't have a real good understanding about the genetics of the plant.
Oh dear.
And the next slide shows that the picture is a lot more complicated. That's just a linear, it's actually a three-dimensional picture where once the genes start jumping around, 4 to 5 years down the road, you don't know what the makeup will be and if there will be any side effects. There's another diagram to show the complexity of the construct or the cassette that we are introducing into each cell of the plant. So we introduce it in the plant, and each cell will carry this new cassette. And you can see that the different colors represent different species, like a bacteria or a viral from a viral origin, that are inserted to make this new trait to function properly in the plant. And the lower section shows the trait that was introduced for the rainbow, the GMO papaya, in Hawaii. So again, it has the desired trait, which made the papaya resistant to viruses, but it also had other different genetic materials. About 15 years after the papaya was released, we learned that a little gene segment had hitchhiked and had been introduced in the papaya without anybody being aware of it. So this is not something that's supposed to happen. For regulators, you are supposed to report, we're introducing this trait, these segments, and there's not supposed to be any hidden genes that hitchhike into the system and are suddenly introduced. We don't know what are the side effects of this hidden gene segment, and so far, about four years later, I have been unable to get information from the UH team to tell me what is up with this segment, with this hidden gene segment. I don't know if there's been any studies to determine its effect and whether it's been reported to regulators in terms of this is what happened. So this is kind of like an unintended aspect of genetic modification that 10 years down the road, something can take place that you really didn't realize that what that was going to happen down the road. So that's kind of called like unintended consequences. Right, right. It's
Scary.
right,
Scary,
right.
scary.
It's a kind of the scary aspects of
Yes.
genetic modification, especially when you don't understand the genetics as well as we should. So in terms of some very basics about GMOs, what crops have been commercialized to date?
Right.
So if you go to the store, where can you find these type of GMO products? And so far, it's only a few crops that have been commercialized and that are available on the market. And these include corn, soybean, cotton, rape or canola, sugar beets, and alfalfa.
What about wheat? I heard wheat is also.
No, it has been, wheat has been transformed, modified, but it hasn't been commercialized yet.
Oh,
So-
it's been. It has GMO, but it has not been commercialized. yet.
Correct, correct. So
But-
in the laboratory, we have GMO'd almost all vegetables and all kinds of crops. We have done it in the
really?
laboratory,
Oh,
but they have not been commercialized. So today you don't see them in the stores
Yet.
yet.
but you know that list that you had up on the screen, corn. It's not just the corn you eat. It's also corn starch. It's also corn oil. Soy. It's not just soybeans. Edamame. It's it's tofu. It's soy lecithin. It's shoyu, and canola oil. Cotton. Could you say a little bit about that? I mean, we don't eat cotton, but
Right,
how
right.
does the GMO affect us if we wear cotton clothing, for instance?
Right, right. So even though you may not eat it fresh, the fresh product, it is right now GMOs are present in almost about 75% of the products in the supermarket, and this is because products are present in most processed food that you buy.
Right.
You buy cereal
Yeah,
or oil or
They
or-
have canola
Right.
oil. They have soy lecithin.
right. So this
Corn
is
starch.
if you are
corn starch.
if you are concerned, this is something that you have to read the label to find out if there's soybean or peanut oil or soybean.
Soybean or
cot-
corn
cot-
oil.
Right, 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 or canola oil. So you have to be aware in processed foods.
Yes.
And if you do not want to consume GMOs, you may have to consume organic products labeled organic.
So there is an option then for us. If they're organic, there are no GMOs in it.
Right, right. Organics would not
That's
have
good
GMOs.
to know.
And more companies are also labeling food. Says this product does not contain any
Right.
GMO.
I love that.
So there, you're seeing it.
Non-GMO
So you're
project.
seeing it. You're seeing it more,
Yes.
more and more.
And can I ask you something? Because of this high pesticide thing that GMOs have, I started washing my vegetables, in salt water. You can use. My husband used baking soda and water, but with organic, the question is, with organics, and can like salt water wash away pesticides?
So washing vegetables may wash off some pesticides that were applied on the surface.
External,
But however, we do have many what are called systemic pesticides, and those are pesticides that go inside the plant and within the system. So there's no way that you can wash them off. There may be the residues may be incorporated into the tissue itself.
And so when GMOs are high pesticide, are a lot of them in the plant itself. You can't wash it off.
A lot of them. So yeah, there's no thumb or rule that you say if you wash it, you're going to be clean of pesticides.
Right, right. And we all know pesticides really harm us also.
Right,
Yes,
right,
yes.
right.
So anyway, I'm sorry.
So
Please go
in
on.
terms of the traits, what has been commercialized to date, what is available in the market, there are two main traits that have been introduced, and both of them are related to pesticides. One of them is a lot of plants have resistance to a herbicide, to to Roundup herbicide. That means if you're on the farm and you spray the field, everything else with the herbicide, everything will die except the crop of corn. So this is what was commercialized, and it makes it a little easier for farmers because they can clean their weeds with sprays.
Yeah, and the corn is GMO corn.
It's GMO corn, and the problem is that you may have higher residues
in the corn.
Once if you do consume that product. The other major trait in the market, they actually inserted a pesticide inside the plant. So if you grow a corn with that pesticide or cotton, when the worms come and feed on the plant, they will die because the plant itself contains a pesticide. So for people that are concerned about this issue, is what are the potential side effects of these products on what are called non-target organisms, on other organisms within the farm or on consumers of people. So this is part of the controversy with respect to these two traits.
And you know, everyone says that GMO crops are really high pesticide, you know, and the question is, why do they need high pesticide? Is it because that's a monocrop? They call it only one crop on the whole farm, not mixed in with other crops. Is that the reason why they're so high pesticide?
They are based on pesticides, mostly because the companies that are producing this seed are pesticide companies themselves. So the same companies that manufacture pesticides are growing the seed at the GMO seed. So obviously they wanted to increase the sales of both the seeds and the pesticides. But it also refers to the method of production. Like you say, these are for crops that are grown on extensive monocultures, on thousands of acres. Right. So under those kind of systems, we often see a lot more pests as compared to more diversified systems.
And can we explain that to people? You were saying that when you have a more diverse crops, that say each different kind of crop, maybe they would take or introduce more chemical, more nitrogen, or take more nitrogen, and then can you explain that, why a diversified crop is more effective, and then we'll go to why a monocrop is less effective?
So small scale farms, like organic farms, are more diversified. So
they have different crops.
Different types of crops, tomatoes, corn, cabbage. So under those systems, it's a little similar to a natural system, where there's more diversified population of beneficial insects, damaging insects. It's a lot more diversified in terms of the organisms on the farm. So it's very difficult for one single organism to take over and say, I'm going to become the dominant species.
Well, you were saying too that, for instance, one plant would, I don't remember if it was, create nitrogen or bring up nitrogen, and then another one would, be involved with another chemical that was beneficial for the plants, and another one would have, another chemical that's beneficial for the plants. I don't know what they are, but they also share. You're saying that they have a root system where they could share their nitrogen in one case, their whatever with the other plants, so that everybody, all the plants get the nutrients that they need in a diversified system.
Correct.
Whereas if you have a monocrop, that it only has the ability to, deal with one kind or a limited number of, say, chemicals, and so that if there's a problem, they're at more risk.
Correct.
They can't. They don't have the whole. They don't have their whole. All their needs met.
Correct.
Because it's only one crop. The way a diversified system, they have all of their nutrients met.
Correct. So in diversified systems, where there's different crops on the single farm, there's two angles. One is the population of organisms, biologic organisms, above ground and below ground, and this is more diverse on a diversified system. So there's a lot of bad guys, a lot of a few bad guys, but there's a lot of good guys that keep the bad guys in check. So these are the diversified system. In terms of resources, the diversified farm is also more effective because plants can share the level of nutrients, the water in the farm, so it's more balanced in terms of resources and also in biological activity. The monocultures are more simplified systems, which require a lot of more external inputs to
fertilizers,
a lot of fertilizers and a lot of pesticides to keep the program afloat because it's very simplified and it can really
can't get all of its nutrients from sharing with other plants. So it needs the fertilizer.
Right.
And then because it's, I guess, in a way weakened by not being able to share, then you need a lot of the herbicides to keep the pests away.
Right.
That's my understanding from what you were saying.
And this refers more to climate change. We're trying to promote in agriculture resilient systems that require less external inputs. So diversified production systems refer more to developing healthy systems that can withstand the effects of climate change.
And not need a lot of herbicides and fertilizers as the way a monocrop would need.
Right.
So
in terms of who is producing the seed, it consists mainly on 6 companies that have now merged. So now consists of mostly 4 companies that globally control about 70% of the pesticide market and about 90% of the seed market. And this is a concern from the community to be more independent in terms of their daily activities and less dependent on big companies from out of state. This slide shows why GMOs are of concern in Hawaii. Our political leaders made a big push for GMOs in the 1990s, and Governor Cayetano was named the Biotech Governor of the Year. All of these 4 seed companies established operations in Hawaii, where they conducted a lot of research over the past 20 years with GMOs on the islands. UH also had a big GMO program, and we released GMO papaya in 1998, and we worked on a GMO taro later on. So all of this has resulted in a lot of discussion within the islands about the type of farming that we really need in the state. And as a result, there's been a lot of social movement. As you see here in the Capitol last year, people saying, stop poisoning paradise, we need to grow our local food. And the issue is we should be taking care of the aina, taking care of the land, instead of welcoming big companies that are trying to do pesticide-based farming on the islands.
Pesticide-based farming for big profits.
Right.
Because there are for a lot of people, there are a lot of health concerns, you know, and after this slide, if you could go over the 3 kinds of studies you were talking about in Latin America, I would appreciate it.
Sure. So some of the concerns that in Hawaii include the drift of pesticides
in the air,
in the islands from these operations. So there's the dust. If you're around Molokai or Kauai, you see the clouds of dust, and the dust probably also contains pesticide residues. So there's been a concern. The concern that the seed companies are not growing food in the islands. They're using a lot of good land without growing any food. They just grow seed that they take out of state. So they're taking away land and water that could be used for growing food in Hawaii for us to be more self-sufficient. And lastly, the issue of contamination. We have contaminated a lot of the organic and non-GMO papaya with the UH GMO rainbow variety that we released in 1998. In terms of health effects.
Oh, I'm sorry, and just one last comment. You were saying that when a GMO plot affects the next plot, that next plot becomes GMO and there's no turning back. So that drift, or whatever you call it, is forever. So in terms of health effects, you were mentioning some Latin American studies?
In terms of health effects with respect to GMOs, it is very difficult to conduct studies in the population because GMOs are not labeled. So they're basically untraceable. So if you become sick 5 years down the road, it's very difficult for you to know where did it come from. If it was from GMOs, you wouldn't know because the product that you purchased in the store was not labeled as GMO. However, there have been some studies, especially in the laboratory, showing potential adverse effects on several organs of the body. And what we need are follow-up studies to confirm or invalidate those type of studies from the laboratory. And so far, we have not conducted those types of studies.
And you were saying there are two other types of studies, one in the wild and...
So with respect to pesticides, because we have GMOs, but we are applying a lot of pesticides to that GMO crop. With respect to pesticides, there's a lot of more stronger evidence showing adverse health effects for populations that have been exposed to those type of pesticides. And the ones I was mentioning to you, there have been many studies from South America, which is a big GMO area, of populations that have been exposed over the years to those sprays, to those pesticide sprays. So we have three types of evidence. We have the symptoms on the population in terms of adverse effects. We have studies on wildlife in that same area, from alligators, frogs, fish, that from that same area. And we have also studies in the laboratory from the same pesticides, from studies that have been conducted in Europe, United States, and Latin America. And the three types of studies have shown the same level of symptoms from exposure to this level of pesticides.
Which are?
The symptoms include embryo deaths, skeletal malformations, genotoxicity, or effects on the DNA of the plant, which down the road can lead to cancer, neurotoxic effects, which affects the nervous system, and also endocrine disruption, which affects the hormonal balance in bodies. And when you affect the hormonal balance, it can have many different ramifications in terms of health.
Well, thank you for giving us all this information, Hector. And the more we know, the more we can stay away from things that could hurt us. Thanks. So thank you so much. And we're going to do a part 2 for the next. So yeah, we have to set up a prep meeting for the next show. Yeah.
Okay.
So I don't know what you want to do. So